The war room was tense, thick with the scent of sweat and stale coffee. Military instructors and cadets crowded around a massive holographic map hovering in the center of the chamber. Red and blue markers flickered, showing troop positions, enemy movements, and dangerous zones. The instructor barked orders and questions, clearly frustrated. He had been planning the next campaign for days, but something wasn't adding up. In the back corner of the room, barely noticeable, sat the girl from Deathworld, quiet, calm, and utterly still. Her dark eyes scanned the chaotic display with the kind of focus that made people uneasy. No one really paid her much attention. She was new, different, and unassuming, a shadow among the loud commanders. Minutes passed as the instructor fumbled with strategies, trying to find the flaw in their defense. The enemy forces had been pushing harder than expected, cutting through their lines with brutal efficiency. They were losing ground, morale, and precious time. The instructor's frustration grew. He slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" he snapped. "Who can explain why the flank collapsed despite reinforcements? Speak up!" Silence fell. No one dared answer. The girl remained quiet, her eyes never leaving the map. Then, without a word, she stood and stepped forward. Everyone turned, some skeptical, others curious. The instructor raised an eyebrow, clearly doubting the newcomer's ability to understand their complex plans. She didn't hesitate. Reaching out, her fingers hovered over the holographic map, and in an instant, just 6 seconds, she rearranged the entire war plan. Lines shifted, units repositioned, supply routes redrawn. The impossible gap in their defense suddenly closed, revealing a clever path to cut off the enemy's advance. The room was stunned. The instructor blinked, unable to speak for a moment. Then slowly he said, "Explain." The girl's voice was calm, steady. "The enemy exploited a weakness in your supply line, one that was masked by the noise of your own forces. I adjusted the map to block their access and reinforce the vulnerable sector." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some cadets exchanged surprised glances. The instructor's face darkened, mixing pride with a grudging respect. "You fixed it in 6 seconds?" he asked. She nodded once, eyes steady. "On Deathworld, seconds mean life or death. You learn to see what others miss." The war room felt different now, charged with a new energy. The instructor motioned her to sit, a silent acknowledgement that she had earned her place. The battle was far from over, but with her insight, hope flickered in the darkness. The instructor couldn't shake the mix of irritation and grudging respect brewing inside him. For years he had led these war rooms with authority, confident in his strategies and experience. But here was this quiet Deathworlder girl, rewriting his plans with ease and challenging everything he thought he knew. As the murmurs died down, the cadets shifted their attention back to the map, now glowing with the new layout she had created. The enemy's advance was clearly marked, and her changes gave them a fighting chance. But the instructor needed more than just a quick fix. He wanted to understand how she saw what no one else could. "Tell us more," he demanded, voice firm but curious. "How did you spot the flaw? What made you see it so fast?" The girl folded her arms, eyes sharp but calm. "On Deathworld, we don't just fight enemies, we fight the planet itself. Every breath, every step is a challenge. You learn to notice patterns, to predict danger before it arrives. It's not just strategy, it's survival." The room was silent, absorbing her words. Some cadets exchanged skeptical glances, unused to hearing survival lessons from a world they considered brutal and unforgiving. But the truth hung in the air, undeniable. She stepped closer to the hologram again, pointing to a narrow valley on the map. "This valley is a natural choke point. Your enemy used it to cut off your supply lines, but you left it unguarded, assuming no one could survive the terrain. That was your mistake." A young cadet frowned. But it's Deathworld terrain, harsh and deadly. Who would risk that? The girl's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Exactly. Someone from Deathworld. We've adapted to those conditions. The enemy has Deathworld survivors among their ranks, trained for this kind of infiltration. They used what you thought was impossible to your advantage. The instructor leaned forward, rubbing his chin. So, you're saying the enemy is using Deathworld tactics against us? She nodded. Yes, and if you want to win, you have to think like them. The instructor straightened, a new determination settling over him. Then we'll train our soldiers to think like Deathworlders. Adapt or die. That's the lesson I'm taking from this. She met his gaze, respect passing between them. Good, because the war isn't just about numbers or weapons. It's about who survives the harshest conditions, on the battlefield and beyond. As the war room buzzed with renewed energy, the girl sat back quietly, her mind already racing ahead. She knew the coming battles would test everyone, but especially those who refused to adapt. The instructor cleared his throat, breaking the moment. All right, everyone, get ready. We're rewriting our tactics, starting now. Outside, the harsh winds of the frontier planet howled, a reminder that this was a war unlike any other. And in the midst of it, the Deathworlder girl had quietly become the key to turning the tide. The War Council wasted no time putting the Deathworlder girl's insight into action. Orders were dispatched swiftly across the communication nets, and the troops began shifting their formations to secure the vulnerable choke point she had identified. The urgency in the command center was palpable. Every second counted. The girl watched silently from the corner, her expression unreadable, but inside her mind raced with memories from Deathworld. She had survived its savage storms, its predators, and its unforgiving landscapes by learning to move fast and think faster. Those lessons now had to translate into this sprawling interstellar conflict. A junior officer approached her cautiously. I'm Lieutenant Harris. Your fix saved us back there. But can you teach us? How do we fight like you? She glanced at him briefly, then nodded. I can. But it's not just about fighting harder. It's about seeing what others don't, understanding the environment and your enemy's mindset. That's what kept me alive. Harris looked impressed, but skeptical. And you really think we can learn that? Most of us come from comfortable worlds. Her eyes darkened with quiet fire. Comfortable worlds won't win this war. Out there, the universe doesn't care if you're comfortable. It cares if you survive. The instructor joined the conversation, folding his arms. Then we need to rethink everything. Training, tactics, even our expectations of what a soldier can do. The room buzzed with a mixture of excitement and unease. Some cadets whispered about the harshness of Deathworld and doubted anyone could survive its methods. Others looked at the girl with newfound respect, realizing that she embodied a kind of strength they hadn't seen before. Days passed as the Deathworlder girl led small training sessions, teaching the troops how to adapt their minds and bodies to harsh conditions, how to read terrain like a predator, and how to anticipate enemy moves before they happened. Slowly, the soldiers started changing, moving more cautiously, thinking more strategically, and relying on instincts they never knew they had. One evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon outside the base, the instructor found her alone, studying the war map again. He hesitated before speaking. You've changed everything here. We owe you more than I thought. She looked up, eyes calm. I'm just doing what I had to do to survive. Now maybe others can survive too. He nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. What's next? Her voice was steady. The enemy will adapt too. We have to be ready for that, and faster. The war was far from over. But with the Deathworlder girl quietly guiding them, hope was no longer just a fragile whisper. It was a growing force, sharp, relentless and unstoppable. The new tactics began to take shape on the battlefield almost immediately. Reports from the front lines started trickling in with surprising news. Enemy ambushes were being anticipated and countered with brutal efficiency. Supply lines once vulnerable were now fortified with Deathworlder-style traps and patrols, making the enemy's advance slow and costly. The instructor paced the command center, eyes fixed on the updated war map. The girl sat nearby, her calm presence a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere around them. The soldiers' success gave them a boost, but everyone knew the enemy wouldn't stay passive for long. Suddenly, a communications officer interrupted with urgent news. "Sir, enemy forces are regrouping. They've deployed a new unit trained for Deathworld combat tactics." The instructor's face tightened. They learned from her. The girl's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained steady. That was expected. Adaptation is the enemy's greatest weapon, but we'll be ready. Preparations began to intensify. The girl worked alongside tactical officers, developing countermeasures for the enemy's new Deathworld-trained units. She taught the soldiers how to detect subtle signs of ambush, how to use the harsh terrain to their advantage, and how to move with stealth and speed even in the most unforgiving conditions. During one briefing, she pointed to a series of ridges and caves on the map. "The enemy will try to use these as cover. We'll set traps that use their own tactics against them. They think they know Deathworld, but they don't know me." The instructor watched her, a mixture of admiration and skepticism in his eyes. "You're risking a lot by relying on these guerrilla tactics. What if it backfires?" She shrugged lightly. "On Deathworld, risk is survival's constant companion. Better to face it head-on than be crushed by fear." As the first engagement with the new enemy units unfolded, tension ran high. The soldiers moved cautiously, eyes sharp for signs of movement. When the enemy appeared, confident and deadly, the Deathworlder girl's strategies kicked in. Mines hidden in narrow passes exploded at just the right moment. Troops flanked from unexpected angles, using every inch of terrain to their advantage. The battle was fierce, brutal, and messy. But when the dust settled, the enemy was forced to retreat, a rare victory that sent a shockwave through both sides. Back in the command center, the instructor allowed himself a small smile. "You were right, thinking like Deathworlders saved us today." She met his gaze with quiet pride. "It's not just thinking, it's survival." The war was far from over, but with each victory, the girl's legend grew. The Deathworlder who sat quietly and fixed a war map in 6 seconds was becoming the symbol of humanity's fierce will to survive, no matter the odds. The war had shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. The once confident enemy was now cautious, reluctant to move without careful reconnaissance. The Deathworlder girl had become more than just a silent observer. She was the beating heart of a new fighting spirit sweeping through the ranks. But victory came with a cost. The terrain was brutal, and each battle scarred both soldiers and the land alike. The instructor often found himself watching the girl during brief moments of calm, curious about the person behind the fierce gaze. She never spoke much about her past, only hints of the harsh world she came from. One evening, after a grueling day of planning, he finally asked, "Why did you come here? Why leave Deathworld for a war that feels so different?" She looked out at the darkening sky, shadows playing across her sharp features. "Because this war isn't just about soldiers or planets, it's about humanity's survival everywhere. Deathworld taught me to survive alone, but out here, survival means helping others survive too." He nodded slowly, understanding more than words could say. "You carry your world with you, and maybe that's what we need, strength born from hardship." Her eyes met his, steady and clear. "Hardship teaches you to see beyond the surface, to read danger where others see safety. to fight when others would give up. The instructor felt the weight of her words settle between them. The war was more than just tactics and weapons. It was a battle of wills, of adapting and overcoming, no matter the pain or loss. As the nights grew colder and the battles fiercer, the Deathworlder girl's quiet strength became a beacon for the troops. They started to trust her instincts, follow her advice, and believe that even in the darkest moments, survival was possible. The enemy, now wary and beaten, began retreating into their last stronghold. The final battle loomed, a test of everything the girl had taught them. The instructor clenched his fists, looking at the girl beside him. "Are we ready?" She nodded, a small, fierce smile breaking through. "We don't just survive, we fight back, and this time, we win." The final battle was unlike any the soldiers had faced before. The enemy's stronghold was nestled deep within a jagged mountain range, surrounded by treacherous cliffs and narrow passes, the perfect Deathworld-style terrain. The instructor and the Deathworlder girl studied the holographic map for hours, planning every move with painstaking detail. "We'll use the terrain against them," she said quietly, tracing a route along the rugged ridges. "We know how to survive here. They don't." The troops were tense but ready, their faces hardened by weeks of brutal fighting and relentless training. The girl moved among them silently, offering quick advice and steady encouragement. She had become their guide, their symbol of survival. As the first squads advanced into the enemy's territory, the battle erupted into chaos. Explosions shook the ground, and the sharp cries of soldiers echoed against the mountains. The enemy fought fiercely, but they were caught off guard by the guerrilla tactics the Deathworlder girl had taught. Traps laid in hidden caves exploded, forcing enemy units into narrow kill zones where the human forces waited patiently. Ambushes from above, where only those used to the harshest conditions could operate, turned the tide again and again. Despite the heavy losses, the soldiers pushed forward, inspired by the girl's quiet determination. She moved through the battlefield like a shadow, anticipating enemy moves and directing troops with sharp precision. At one critical moment, the enemy launched a desperate counterattack aimed at cutting off the main force. The instructor, coordinating from the command center, felt his heart race. The line was breaking. Then, as if sensing the danger, the Deathworlder girl appeared on the comm link. "Redirect the eastern flank through the ravine. It's narrow, but it's the only way to flank them." The instructor hesitated. He knew the terrain was deadly. "That's a suicide run." She didn't waver. Not for those who know how to survive Deathworld. Against his better judgment, he ordered the maneuver. The troops followed the girl's command, moving swiftly and silently through the ravine's dangers. The surprise attack hit the enemy's flank hard, breaking their lines and forcing a retreat. The battlefield fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of exhausted soldiers. Back in the command center, the instructor exhaled deeply. "You did it. We did it." The girl allowed herself a brief smile. Survival isn't just about strength, it's about knowing when to take risks. As the dust settled and victory dawned, the war room erupted in cheers. The Deathworlder girl, who had once sat quietly at the back, was now the heart of their triumph. But even in victory, she knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, the threats endless, and humanity's fight for survival was far from over. The victory had shifted the balance of the war, but the price was heavy. The once confident war room now carried an air of quiet exhaustion, mixed with cautious hope. The Deathworlder girl sat at the edge of the room, her eyes scanning the updated map, already searching for the next threat. The instructor approached, his footsteps soft but deliberate. "You've changed the way we fight, but war isn't just about battles, it's about the people we're fighting for. Have you thought about what comes after?" she looked up, expression unreadable. After. Survival. He nodded slowly. Yes, but there has to be more. We can't keep fighting forever. We need a future worth surviving for. Her gaze softened for a moment, memories flickering behind her eyes. On Deathworld, there was never a promise of tomorrow, only the will to live through today. Maybe this war will teach us to build something stronger. The instructor smiled faintly, sensing a shift in her. You might be the key not just to winning the war, but to winning peace. The room fell silent as they both contemplated the weight of those words. Outside, the distant stars twinkled cold and bright, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the challenges ahead. Meanwhile, the soldiers were beginning to see her as more than a survival expert. They saw her as a leader. Quiet, unyielding, and fiercely dedicated. She was a symbol of humanity's grit, a reminder that no matter how dark the universe seemed, there was always a spark that refused to die. As the War Council prepared for the next phase, she stood up and faced the room. We fight not just for survival, but for the future we want to create. Every lesson we learn here, every sacrifice we make, it's all for the chance to live free. The instructor nodded, pride shining in his eyes. Then let's make sure that future is worth fighting for. The Deathworlder girl's quiet strength had become the foundation for a new hope. A hope that even in the harshest worlds, humanity could endure, adapt, and ultimately triumph. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and cautious optimism. The War Council, now heavily influenced by the Deathworlder girl's strategies, began focusing not just on winning battles, but on rebuilding what the war had torn apart. Supplies were rerouted to civilian zones, medical teams were trained in survival techniques, and soldiers were taught to protect as much as to fight. The girl herself was no longer just a tactical mind. She became a mentor, guiding troops in the art of endurance and resilience. Her lessons went beyond combat. They were about understanding the fragile balance between life and death, hope and despair. One evening, as she walked through the camp, she saw soldiers gathered around a small fire, sharing stories of their homes, their families, and dreams for a peaceful future. For the first time, the girl felt a flicker of something she hadn't known for years: belonging. A young recruit approached her hesitantly. "Miss, do you ever think about going back to Deathworld?" She paused, looking at the rugged horizon. "Sometimes. But this is where I'm needed now. If I can help build a future here, maybe it's better than running back to a world that only teaches you to survive." The recruit smiled, inspired by her words. "You've given us more than tactics. You've given us hope." She nodded quietly. "Hope is the strongest weapon we have." Back in the war room, the instructor watched her from across the table. "You've changed everything. I don't know if I ever truly believed we could win, until now." She met his gaze steadily. Winning isn't just about battles. It's about never giving up on tomorrow. As the stars shimmered beyond the command center's windows, the girl felt something new rising inside her, a fierce determination not just to survive, but to help humanity thrive, no matter what worlds they faced. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the future felt within reach. The momentum was shifting, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. The Deathworlder girl's influence had permeated every corner of the military and beyond, inspiring not just soldiers, but civilians and leaders alike. Her story, the girl who sat quietly and then fixed a war map in 6 seconds, had become a legend whispered in mess halls and briefing rooms. Yet beneath the growing hope, a harsh truth lingered. The enemy was not defeated, only pushed back. They were adapting too, learning from every loss, growing more ruthless and desperate. The girl knew this all too well. Survival was a constant battle, and complacency was the enemy's greatest ally. One night, as she pored over intelligence reports, a troubling pattern emerged. The enemy was mobilizing a secret weapon, something designed to break the fragile peace before it could take hold. The instructor stood behind her, watching the holographic data flicker. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't look up. "A weapon that targets not just soldiers, but the minds of entire populations. Propaganda, fear, and chaos, designed to shatter morale and turn allies against each other." The instructor's face darkened. "We need to act fast. If they succeed, everything we've built could collapse." She nodded, eyes steely. "Then we fight smarter. Not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of our people." Over the following days, she worked with communications officers, strategists, and diplomats to counter the enemy's psychological assault. She taught soldiers how to recognize misinformation, how to stay united under pressure, and how to protect their communities from despair. The war had grown beyond guns and tactics. It was a battle for humanity's very soul. Despite the mounting challenges, the Deathworlder girl never wavered. Her quiet strength became a beacon through the darkest nights, reminding everyone that even in the face of overwhelming odds, survival wasn't enough. They had to thrive. The galaxy was watching, and humanity was ready to show what it truly meant to fight, survive, and endure. The psychological warfare was brutal and relentless. False reports spread quickly through communication channels, sowing doubt among allies and causing mistrust within their own ranks. Civilians whispered fears in the streets, and even seasoned commanders found themselves second-guessing decisions. The enemy's weapon was working, threatening to unravel everything the Deathworlder girl and the instructor had fought so hard to build. But the girl refused to let despair take hold. She gathered a small team of trusted soldiers and communication specialists and set out to create a counter-strategy grounded in truth and resilience. She knew that the same survival instincts that kept her alive on Deathworld could help others resist the enemy's mental attacks. "We need to be louder than their lies," she told the team during a tense briefing. "We can't just fight with weapons. We have to fight with honesty, with courage, and with unity." Together, they launched a campaign that spread clear, factual information to every corner of their territory. They shared stories of survival, strength, and hope. They highlighted acts of bravery and kindness, proving that even in war, humanity's spirit remained unbroken. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Soldiers found renewed trust in their leaders. Civilians stopped fearing shadows and started standing together. The enemy's psychological grip weakened, and their own forces grew more confident. The instructor watched these changes with a mixture of awe and relief. "You've done more than just fix war maps and teach tactics. You've saved our minds." She shrugged, a rare smile touching her lips. "On Deathworld, losing hope means dying long before your time. If we lose that here, none of this matters." As the war pressed on, the Deathworlder girl became more than a strategist or mentor. She became a symbol of what humanity could endure and achieve. Quiet, fierce, and unyielding, she was the spark that ignited a fire no enemy could extinguish. The galaxy was still dangerous, still uncertain. But with her leading the way, humanity's future shone a little brighter. The war had stretched on longer than anyone had expected, leaving scars on planets, soldiers, and souls alike. But through it all, the Deathworlder girl remained a steady force, quiet, unyielding, and sharp as ever. Her 6-second fix of the war map had sparked a revolution in how humanity fought and survived, turning despair into hope and chaos into order. As peace talks finally began on the horizon, the war room felt different. The tension had eased, replaced by cautious optimism. The instructor stood beside her, both watching the flickering holograms that now showed a path toward ceasefire and rebuilding. "You changed everything," he said quietly. "Not just the war, but us." She looked at him, her gaze soft but fierce. "I didn't do it alone. Survival is a choice, and it's one we make every day. This war taught us to fight harder, think smarter, and never give up on each other." The soldiers who had once doubted her now looked to her as a symbol of resilience and strength. Civilians began to rebuild their shattered worlds, inspired by the idea that even in the darkest places, humanity could endure. She stepped away from the map, finally allowing herself a moment to breathe. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, but for the first time in a long time, the future felt like something worth fighting for and protecting. As the stars shimmered beyond the command center's windows, she smiled quietly to herself. The Deathworlder girl who had sat silently and fixed a war map in 6 seconds had become something greater, a beacon of hope, a symbol of humanity's unbreakable will to survive. And that will, she knew, would carry them through whatever came next.